Welcome to the Sultans of Sales podcast. I'm your host, Jamil Pendleton. Today on the show, we have a very special guest, Harel Gadot, and who is just got such an awesome experience and background. Harel and I met almost a year ago down at the SDTS conference in Houston, and that Sage has put on through Joe Mullings. And it was awesome to see you present, Harel, and definitely want to give you a proper introduction to the audience. First off, thank you for coming on, and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
You bet. So, Harel, you are the founder, chairman, president, and CEO of Microbot Medical, which, as I understand, you co-founded in 2011 all the way up through IPO in 2016. The founder and chairman of XACT Robotics, as well as the founder and chairman of MEDX Ventures Group, which inside contains an incubator, which is really interesting, that you have government support and kind of working with some large strategic companies in MedTech. So that's what a background. I got so many questions, so much to learn from you. And again, just thanks for carving out some time.
It's my pleasure, and you make me feel more important than I am. But I'm here to answer anything you want.
Yeah, well, let's dive right in. I mean, your career path, like it seems, just looking at your LinkedIn profile, you started off as a sales manager, right? J&J and large strategic companies, did a lot of things there, right? All the way up to the what was the last role you had, the worldwide group marketing director. So can you talk about just advancing your career, right? And maybe just based on your experience at both the large companies and then now running some very exciting MedTech startups.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just correct one thing. I started as a sales rep.
Sales rep.
I didn't even start with the manager position. But if I can take you even a little bit before that, I always tell people I'm a basketball player, not a tennis player. And The message I send by that is I know how to work with a team. I'm only as good as the people working with me. And it is true. I did play pro basketball in my career. So before I went into healthcare, I used to play Division I basketball and then pro basketball in Europe. And that really was the first part of how you learn the value of a team. I did start as a sales rep in Israel. And I think that was the best thing that ever happened to me because I started with a company called Ethicon.
Yes.
At Johnson & Johnson. And the beautiful thing about Ethicon is that you approach every space in healthcare. So everybody using sutures, gynecologists, urologists, orthopedics, that really allowed me to understand not just a specific space, but a cross section and understand how they behave. And I love that. I never viewed sales as sales. I viewed sales as partnership, as building relationship and understanding at the end of the day, who's the most important stakeholder.
Right.
And it's the patient.
100%.
And you get to the patient through the physician. And when you understand that, you either get excited about it or not. I do.
Me too.
So I moved up all the way to 2016 when, as you said, I really viewed sales or building partnership with physician as a holistic view. And that's when I was lucky enough to get a position in Europe, Middle East and Africa. So I moved to Europe for Ethicon, and I ran the strategic marketing for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And then in 2017, I moved to the headquarters of Ethicon in Somerville, New Jersey. And my last position, as you mentioned, was the worldwide group marketing director for one of the divisions of Ethicon, the urology and gynecology. And that's where really when I learned what I'm doing today. When you work in that position and you're responsible for the future pipeline of the company, you look into two areas. You look into organic growth. How can you leverage the core capabilities of the organization? And then you look outside of what kind of like an M&As, partnerships, and so on. And you work with really cross-functional team within the organizations from operations, new business development, sales, marketing to understand how we go about the future. Really understanding at that point that the future of corporate America is not going to come from internal development. I believe that 80% of the future of the big companies is going to come from external transactions, from acquisitions to partnerships and so on. And that's what really led me to what I'm doing today, to really understand that I want to be part of the 80%,
Yes.
not part of the 20%. And probably being Israeli and my blood, I'm not sure that I was the perfect fit for corporate America. We like to move fast, we like to move forward. And that was really the pathway I took forward.
That's incredible. And I'm glad you mentioned that about your heritage and being Israeli, because I've been doing quite a bit of research on that in preparation for this conversation. Israel is just a hotbed of innovation and as well as obviously in MedTech, but in other areas too. And these are some interesting stats. Israel is second only to the US in companies listed on Nasdaq. There's over 9,000 startups, which is roughly one startup for every 1,000 Israeli, based on the per capita. And then of those startups, there's been 600 companies just in general across the board of unicorn status, which is valuation of $1 trillion or more. And 60 of those 600 unicorns came from Israel. So that is incredible statistically, just to see the data, which backs up what you said about kind of in your own way and maybe in the culture of Israel, which seems to be fueling this innovation. There's also a couple more pieces: most engineers per capita, most patients per capita, highest rate of GDP invested into R&D in the world. And so like there's a lot of things here that I just threw out there for you and for the audience, but I was just fascinated down this. I was going down this research, and I just wanted to get your thoughts. This seems to be a cultural thing happening, obviously, with all that. But what can you share about where things are going? Why there's so much innovation happening in Israel?
I have the luxury of coming to the US and study here right after my military service, then working for a US company out of Israel, live in Europe, managing 24 countries, then back here. And I could see not only the different cultures, but really understand corporate America versus the early stage companies, that what I'm doing today. When you talk about Israel, we can go back years ago. First of all, people forget that Israel is still a very young nation, right?
Yes.
We haven't been here for 200 years. So Israel is still, although it looks very stable and growing, it's still in the way of growth. They're still not as old and stable in a way as other companies, although the economy is growing. So people are still building the country, if I may call it that way. And we're looking for different ways to do that. That's number one. We're still a young country. The second one is pretty much the history of the people that came to the country. And it can start from, the 80s, when you had the Russian immigrations and you had a lot of great engineers, physicians coming in, scientists, and the government needed to find a way to allow them to leverage their skills so they can match their jobs to what they can bring value and create jobs. And the government did a great job with their incubator programs, which we can discuss later.
Yes.
You go back and you talk about the army. In the Israeli army, it's okay to challenge your superior. It's okay to ask the right questions or the wrong questions. You find the way that you tell Israeli something, and while you're talking, they already think they know better. They already have a better solution. It's in the culture. It's nothing that I can tell you how can we duplicate it around the world. Another thing that we have to remember is that Israel has about 9 million people. And there are, if you take away southern Israel, where the population is very lean, most of them concentrate in a very condensed area, from Tel Aviv area all the way to the Haifa, a little bit to the north. And all of a sudden, many people ask me, how does Israel, is such a great country in medical devices, for example? And the first thing I tell them is, stop considering Israel as a country, consider it as one big incubator.
Right.
Because we are so small, we know each other. I cannot tell you how many times I had a meeting with my R&D team when I'm in Israel. And at 9 p.m., we face an issue. We go home, and at 7 a.m., somebody comes back with an answer. And he said, how'd you get an answer? And he said, well, I remember somebody from the army that is now working in this, and I called him and we will talk about it and have a solution, right?
That's incredible.
So it's the culture, it's the atmosphere, it's the okay to challenge, it's the okay to think out of the box, it's the okay to fail and not carry this for the rest of your life. You failed, get up, move on, find another solution.
Right.
And very smart people. I can tell you that on a daily basis. You spoke about my incubator or even other companies. On a daily basis, we see very smart people, from engineers to physicians to even business people, that come up with some ideas that you just smile. And he said, that's really smart.
That's right.
And the question is, how do you put it together?
You know, that's really fascinating too. And I draw from, I don't know if we talked about this when we met or not, but I was fortunate enough to meet just an awesome group of Israelis when I did some backpacking and traveling in Thailand, and they had all served in the military, met both men and women. Obviously, it's something that everybody does. And the perspective that I got, because we really enjoyed one another, like our group, we just kind of naturally gravitated, are Texans and Israelis. I don't know. Yep. But they said, one of them said something to me. They said it was, tomorrow's not promised because of the, you know, maybe call it some of the religious conflict or the war, what have you, but tomorrow's not promised. And so live for today. And that's kind of how I at least had seen that, the people, and why it was such it was an alluring way to live, like in a kind of a mindset, if you will. So I don't know if you care to comment on that, or if you have thoughts on that, just kind of from a people standpoint.
So, you know, earlier you called me sir, and I was turning around looking for my father. Then I realized I just turned 50, so I should be called sir, right? I'm
yes.
old now.
Happy birthday. That's
so
awesome.
Thank you. So I can speak on my generation. So my mom is the second generation for Holocaust survivors. And then I grew up with this. So yes, I mean, growing up with my generation is nothing is guaranteed, right? You have to take care of yourself. As I mentioned, that's one of the things with Israel, young country, nothing is guaranteed. People look into Israel from, you know, if you talk about Singapore, okay, Singapore tried to learn the incubator system in Israel and duplicate it. But many countries look into Israel trying to duplicate what we're doing and still forget that Israel is still a young country. So yes, nothing is granted, especially where you go to the army, you saw this, you face it. Many at my generation still remember our grandparents and the stories about, you know, the Holocaust and how they needed to take care of themselves. So yeah, there is this drive, at least from my generation, of we have to take care of ourselves, we have to develop ourselves. It's probably still in the younger generation, maybe in different areas.
Sure.
But everybody goes to the army. So everybody get the same culture, everybody get the same alignment on what it means to support the country and be there for each other. We all understand the opportunities that we have and we understand the risks.
Yes.
And as Israel became Americanized in the last 25, 30 years, many things from America came over. We were exposed to the bigger world, right? I mean, 30 years ago, I don't remember having McDonald's in Israel. Now we have McDonald's and Burger King and all the companies. I think that every American company that respects itself has an innovation hub in Israel, right? So we get exposed to this kind of a business, and all of a sudden you have the drive not only to build an Israeli company, but an international company and become bigger. And that's the Israelis. How can we make it better? How can we drive forward? How can we challenge each other? And I love that.
Sure.
I mean, every time I have a visitor from the US and he comes to a meeting, I don't remember the last time it didn't happen. They tell me, I don't get it. You guys argue, fight, want to kill each other in the room. And when the meeting is done, you all go outside and drink beer together. And the truth is we disagree. We're not trying to kill each other, right? We know how to fight without hating each other, as they say. But that's the culture.
And that's healthy. Groupthink is dangerous. When everyone's just there kind of in that echo chamber, that's not where innovation happens. It's when it's in those meetings that you mentioned, in my experience.
I'm with you. And you asked me for some feedback, for example, my experience with corporate America and Israel. I want to be very clear. I could not do what I'm doing today without Johnson & Johnson. Best school, best mentors I ever had, and I learned a lot. But things like, let's agree to disagree. How many times do you heard that in corporate America?
Oh, right? Yes.
That's to me, to date, and it's not because English is my second language, is because I just don't get it. What does it mean? I disagree. Let's agree to disagree. In Israel, they're not going to let you leave the room saying that. And that's, I think, the culture is we either agree, we disagree, we get alignment, and we go and execute, and we're going to make it quickly. So I agree with you 100%. It's really ingrained within the Israeli culture.
It's fascinating, and I mean it's been proven out with companies like Mazor and some of the other companies that hit my world of neurosurgery, orthopedic spine. It's been pretty awesome to see, and things that will come from here as technology continues to improve medicine and healthcare. So let's go there. I mean, maybe you can use however you'd like to talk about either your companies or just in general, robotics. I remember your talk, which was fascinating, on robotics in the ASC space and some other pearls there. But I mean, wherever you'd like to educate the audience on what you see, happening today, what's going to come in the very near future, would love to get your perspective.
Sure, as long as we understand this is my perspective, right? You saw
absolutely.
me on stage, and I'll speak up my mind. So before we even talk about robotics, let's talk about healthcare, and let's talk about facts. Okay, the facts are that we have shortage of physicians, and it's just going to grow, and that immediately translates into shortage in skills. We have shortage of nurses, and that's not a dispute. That's really what's happening. We have issue of access to technologies. When you live in mid-America, you don't have the same ability to access new technologies because they don't have the right funding, they don't have the right users.
Right.
So we now have access, and that's led into a word that you heard gazillion times: democratization. And if we ever want to solve the healthcare issues we have here, then we have to get to what people call democratization, which I also call it accessibility. For everybody. And I'll give you just a simple example. If, God forbid, you wake up in the morning one day and you start coughing blood, and you go and see your radiologist, and they do a scan, and they see an 6 millimeter lesion in your lung, 99% of them will tell you to go home and wait until it grows. Why? Because they can reach it. And the holy grail of medicine is earlier diagnostic, right? And then from earlier diagnostic to customized treatment and so on.
Right.
And when you talk about XACT Robotics, for example, my company that we develop, now you can allow that earlier diagnostic, more treatments, better treatments, customized treatments, because we can go earlier. So when you look at the healthcare, we need to understand the gap. Another gap that I see is many physicians like to go to the hospitals because they're going to feel better. No, wrong. When you go to the hospitals, you're going to get sicker.
That's right.
My vision is that hospitals, and I know that I'm not going to be popular with the CEOs of hospitals, but hospitals should be for emergency only. Everything else that is not urgent, you should do it outside the hospital. And it may be an OBL, it may be an ASC. And as we go through technologies that are enabling easier procedures, outpatient procedures, less invasive procedures, that's the way it's gotta be. Now, from a perspective of the industry, we need to find a way to eliminate the accessibility issues. Now, first thing that you're going to ask me, you're talking about the money. I'm going to say, let's forget about the money for a second. You're going to an ASC. The real estate is very expensive.
Absolutely.
You don't have this huge OR rooms that you can put an intuitive surgical robot. Okay, you can't. It's just impossible. Or you cannot put into the CT suite or the MRI 10 different systems that block it. So we need to find a way not only to somehow eliminate the $1-2 million expense on capital, but also the size of the capital. So we can actually fit into this real estate. We need to be able to make sure that accessibility is not only for the physician or the hospital, it's also for the patients. Because how many times you heard time is brain, right? In neurosurgery.
Absolutely.
So when you have a patient, when you have a physician, or you have a patient that comes to the hospital with a stroke, you don't have 30 minutes to set up a robot before you start the procedure. So how do you allow access to that patient that just came and can get the best robotic surgery, or in the hands, so-called, of the best physicians. But if we look at Microbot Medical, for example, that I started, as you mentioned, we took it public, and we developed the first ever fully disposable robot for endovascular procedure. Guess what? Now off the shelf, you have a ready to go, and potentially even look at the next step, which is not a product. Today, many robots are a product. And the question I ask myself all the time is, how do we turn from a product to a procedure? How do we ensure, like, Mazor did with Medtronic, that it's not just the robot, but it's also the disposal, the implants, that you have it from day one.
Right.
Those are the things that we, in my opinion, need to think about. Healthcare is to allow access to all stakeholders, from the hospital administration to help them, with the cost, with the real estate, to the physicians, to allow them to be able to use it anywhere they want, whenever they want. Right. And the patients, so the patient don't have to drive 50 miles, 60 miles just to get a treatment. And especially when it comes to places like stroke management, where you cannot really drive 50 minutes. And we have the infrastructure coming, right? We talk about 5G.
Right.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
5G can be for remote procedures, remote teaching. We need to eliminate the big learning curves. There are so many things that we as an industry should work with the different stakeholders to ensure accessibility to different technologies. And that will eventually lead to the holy grail that everybody's been talking about. I know you're a Medtronic graduate, and I cannot tell you how many times I heard that word from Medtronic when I spoke to them. It's democratization.
Yes. And
democratization has one more side to it, and that's the physicians. How many times have you heard from physicians, in my hand, I get the best results? And I always tell the physicians, well, first of all, nobody has your hands. Why? Because you may be 55 and you have experience, and the physician next to you is younger. So the second question I ask myself is, then how do we democratize? By leveling the field. I'm not trying to say that we're going to replace physicians. We did not replace the pilots. No. Right? Automated pilot did not replace the pilot. It enhanced their capabilities. We need to think about the same way with physicians. How can we enhance their capabilities by taking from the equations in my hand? We have technologies like XACT Robotics. And if you don't mind, I will tell you a story.
Please, yes.
When we started XACT Robotics, so XACT is the first and only truly autonomous robot. So the physicians plan the procedure on a CT, real-time images. Right now, CT, in the future, should be compatible with any other modalities. The physician, just like a pilot, plan where's the entry point, where's the target, where I want to get. And once you get a trajectory, it tells the robot, I'm good. The clinical decision is always the physician. And then the robot itself, the physician doesn't touch anything, insert the tool. It can be ablation probe, it can be a biopsy needle, all the way to the target. And it's okay.
That's amazing.
It's not to replace them, but guess what? It allows them to go after smaller targets, earlier diagnostic, right?
Right.
It allows them to spend less time in the room. All of a sudden, they don't spend 40 minutes and working reinserting needles, but they know 5 to 8 minutes they're done. The effect it has on the hospital, it's huge. The effect it will have on the patient is huge. And I think that's what we need to look at. We need to look into technologies that don't solve one stakeholder's issue, but add values to the entire stakeholder.
Well, so first off, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I just to play devil's advocate, though, there are some surgeons, and I'm sure you've talked with these types as well, who resist enabling technology because they feel it marginalizes and diminishes their value. What are your thoughts on that? On that perspective of, look, I've gone to school, or in my hands, and they have the ability to do certain things in 3D and treat that patient, and every patient is different. And so there's a resistant. I think maybe my perception of robotics has been colored by the fact that it's still in infancy in spine and not as mature as it is in other areas. But I would just love, because it's going that way. There's smaller robots that are now being introduced for the ASC space for spine procedures, right? The REMI is one of those, which was developed by, I believe, an Israeli company as well. But just wanted to get your thoughts on that kind of the pushback from surgeons, and it's not ready for prime time, and there's all these kind of those things that you hear. And I just wanted to get your thoughts.
I'm a big James Bond fan.
Me too.
So now you go from James Bond and physicians. I'll give you the example. My wife knows that my dream car is an Aston Martin. Used to be the DB9, now the DB12.
Okay.
And I don't want to have autonomous cars because I love to drive and I want my Aston Martin one day to drive. But I can tell you that once a week in the winter, when we drive back from New Hampshire after skiing at 9 p.m., and I have 3 girls and a puppy snoring in the back of my car.
That's right.
I wish I had an autonomous car. I wish I could just close my eyes and go to sleep because now I have 3 hours back home drive, right?
That's right.
So even I can tell you from my perspective, I think I'm a great driver. I love to drive, but there's some certain points in time that I wish I had an autonomous car.
Okay.
And why did I give you that example? I completely agree with you. There's a lot of physicians that resisting new technologies for many reasons. I can tell you one thing that to me was the most unbelievable in my head is that the head of a department in a big university hospital once told me, it's great for my patients. I love the technology. It can add so much value, but I will not buy it. And I said, okay, is it money? He said, no. We're a teaching institute and we need to have our residents and physicians do only manual procedures. And I looked at him and I said, you know, doc, if 20 years ago, the general surgeons would have said that about laparoscopy, we will still do a 20 centimeter incision for a simple hernia. That blows my mind. That's really not okay. Okay. This is, in my opinion, you need to teach any generation of physicians about the different options that should treat the patient the best way. And
That's right.
May be robotic and it may be manual. I mean, even with the technologies we develop in robotics today, one of the key metrics that we put in my companies is how quickly can you move from robotics to manual? Because sometimes things happen, right?
If you need to, right?
You have to. And to me, that's what I'm missing with this physician is the ability to look holistically and not say I'm great. Because A, you may be great, but not everybody's like you. B, there's a shortage in people like you.
Right.
There's no dispute about it. And population is getting older. We need to have more procedures. So to me, we need to work as a team, everybody.
That's right.
But I respect these people when you say, I build my skills over the years. And what I would love for them to say, let me help you guys develop the next generation of products to put into play my skills that I have as a physician. So hopefully a robot one day can mimic this.
No, that's a really interesting point. I mean, there's so many topics that I'm thinking about, and just trying to resist the urge to derail what you're saying. But just one point, that robotics or any enabling technology, right? It needs to have some, I would say, pillars that make it worthwhile, worth all. So safety, right? Reliability, precision, value, and efficiency, right? Those are kind of the things that are swimming around in my head. I think that for a lot of reasons, enabling technology will improve the procedure, the solution, but there's a hesitancy, there's a resistance, and it's back to your point of the physician that you mentioned. It's they're worried that if something breaks or something's not available, that they're training these future generations of surgeons in these new and innovative and technology enhanced ways that they would not be able to go back and do it open or do it the old way, right? And that's what I remember hearing, and it's been debated. It's actually a pretty healthy debate in a lot of circles.
So why are you getting on a flight?
Yeah.
Why? Think about it.
Right.
Why are we getting on an airplane? I mean, 90%, 95% of the flight is done by the automatic pilot. Something can go wrong, something can break, but this is why you have a pilot that's going through training, not through flying 100% of the time, right? But they have simulators and they have all the other stuff that will allow them to take over at a certain point.
That's
And
right.
that's what we need to get in surgery, because sometimes I much rather take the risk that something is going to go wrong with a robot than go have a surgery with somebody that doesn't have the experience, doesn't have the skills, or in the wrong place even.
That's right.
Like the hospital, when I can acquire infections that I don't need to if I will do it somewhere else. I think we're going to go through a process that the aviation world went through. But that's, again, when you hear me keep saying the stakeholders, you have to remember the stakeholders, like in aviation, was the FAA, the pilots, the flight attendants, the travelers. Same thing with healthcare. We need to have the FDA, the physicians, the nurses, and the patients. Everybody feel comfortable and agree. And if one part of that equation doesn't sing kumbaya with the other, it will be very hard to adapt it.
Well said. Well said. I want to be respectful of your time. You're still good for a couple more questions?
I'm good until 2 o'clock. I'm all yours.
Okay, perfect. So it seems like you have a love. Obviously, you've cut your teeth with a lot of new technology and a lot of these. And I want to talk about the MEDX Xelerator, the incubator. It seems like you see a lot of things that are super infancy, right, early before commercialization, and kind of. Can you talk about that? Like what excites you? Maybe what does surgery look like in 5 years? Right. Because I know the last 5 years have seen an incredible shift in so many different ways. It's hard to even imagine where things were in 2017, but where are they going to be in 2027?
I'm with you 100%. So Einstein once said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, right?
That's right.
And that's how I look into the early stage innovation that we are either seeing or developing ourselves. And I'll give you the simplest example. People ask me, why aren't I going into the laparoscopic surgery? Well, you have Intuitive, you have Cambridge Medical Robotics, you have all these companies looking into this, and they're all doing the same thing. Putting a robot on wheel doesn't make it mobile. Let's be very honest. But building a robot which is fully disposable and fit, at the palm of your hand, like Microbot, or a robot the size of an iPad, like XACT, that to me is a true mobile. So based on that, I like to be first. That's the way we view things. We don't like to be second unless we can develop something which is so different that simplifies everything. Like a company that we have append that took the complexity of an LAA procedure, LAA closure, and turned it into a very simple procedure because we're going back to accessibility. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I got you.
I'm coming from, I want to be first and I want to disrupt. I want to see where patients are not getting the best treatment that we believe they can get. And again, I want to go back and recognize the really great team we have, not only at the incubator, but every company that we have and the MEDX Ventures Group and our partners, from Boston Scientific to other partners. The way we're looking at things is not just what's in our immediate portfolio, but what else we can learn from it so we can advance patients' care. And most of the time, it's not doing the same thing over and over again and just putting wheels on it or making it white or pink, but it's really thinking out of the box. And one of the things I want to give you example is I'm struggling with robotic system that are one-trick pony, that you pay all this money for one procedure. And this is why we need to look at XACT Robotics, and we can do all these procedures in any organ of the body. You look at Microbot Medical, can do any endovascular procedure. That's where I see being very different. And that's where I see, you ask me, where do I see? So I'll share with you, because you were there when we were in Houston, I believe, about a year ago. And I was on a panel. If you remember, the last question on the panel, the moderator asked all the distinct people on the panel, what will be the cost of capital equipment in robotics in the next 10 years?
I remember, yeah.
And everybody said it's going to be anywhere between $500,000 to $2 million. And to remind you, my answer was, I don't think that in 10 years, anybody's going to buy capital equipment. And I really believe in that. I believe that in 10 years, the adoptions of robotics will be so high that people will not sell capital. People will place the capital, and the volume will be big enough to support the fact that we don't need to use capital as a barrier for adoption. And that's where I see where we're going to be in 10 years from now is capital is an access that you don't pay for it. And robotics will become more and more a platform use. You're going to have some robotics that's going to be customized for a certain procedure.
Sure, absolutely.
They probably need to be, but I believe they're going to be part of a bigger robotic ecosystem that people will see. I believe that the robotic ecosystem is not just the hardware. And I think I presented that at Biomed. And then somebody told me one of the largest companies actually stole my presentation, which is flattering, by the way. But I really believe that the future is an ecosystem that includes the hardware, the software, which also include, big data, AI, and so on, imaging, because more and more we rely on the imaging from a CT to an MRI to an ultrasound, instruments. Another thing that think about it, most of the companies today, you have the robot and then you use other instruments off the shelf. Sometimes they don't talk to each other. And then eventually cybersecurity will become part of it as we become into more smart devices, right? From implants to robotic system. And I believe we need to look at it as an ecosystem that we have to integrate all together. And that's how we're going to see it. So people may not pay for the CT anymore. Why? Because the CT has a robot, but you also don't pay for the robot. So all of a sudden you didn't pay for the robot, you didn't pay for the CT. What did you pay for? You pay for the procedure. You pay for you paid for the disposables, you paid for the information you got from the procedure, and you improve all the time. Think how many barriers we can eliminate by that.
I mean, I think you're right in the way in which first off, it's all grounded in how can this improve surgery for the patient. And I think that that's the healthy piece that I keep hearing. It's a recurring theme to your companies, to your mindset of how you're approaching solving these problems. It seems as that's the right track. I think the challenge is well, first off, not everyone has the patient at the center, and that's sad, but that's true, right? It's
patience is a virtue.
Yes. Yeah.
So let me tell you what the challenge is. In my humble opinion,
I love it.
Who's going to do it? So I've been preaching this for the last decade since I left J&J that I believe in this ecosystem. In the last few years, I saw that the imaging companies start doing it. So Philips start buying, right? Instruments companies. You look at Siemens, they bought Corindus.
That's right.
So they start understanding more and more the ecosystem, but they're still not there, and they don't have the culture of moving quickly and building this. So is it the big corporate America? Well, they don't really have that culture. And you can see the people sometimes they hire into these positions, and I'm asking myself, why? They don't have that experience. So that's one. And then you say, okay, let's look at the startup companies where as a person who's not only an entrepreneur, but I'm also investing in my companies. I want my company to have focus. So if somebody's going to come and tell me, well, I have a startup company and I'm developing a new CT and a new robot and a new guide wire, I'll tell them, whoa, where's your focus? Why I'm investing in?
Right.
So here's the biggest challenge I'm asking myself. Who's going to be the one to disrupt this market to where at least my vision that I'm sharing you with is it going to be the Philips, Siemens, Medtronic of the world? That I'm questioning this because I don't think they have the culture or the core capabilities, by the way, because there are some companies that have culture. I mean, we just signed an agreement with Stryker, with Microbot, and I can tell you that I am so impressed by their innovation culture. That's really, really pleasure to work with.
That's awesome.
But I doubt it. And then you look at the startup companies and you're saying, how can they do that? The only way they can do that is if they merge together.
That's right.
And then you have, the ego of the entrepreneurs. So there's challenges either way, but I think eventually it's going to happen, and it's going to happen through consolidation of different businesses. It's going to happen through a mutual interest of either partnerships or JVs. And I'm not talking about Google and J&J. That was meant to fail from day one. Okay, let's be very clear. I'm talking about really leveraging all this ecosystem together, that the imaging companies can work with the robotic companies, and they do it from day one. And I understand that the sum of the parts is way bigger than the parts.
Some of the parts is way bigger than the parts. Well said. And I would completely agree. So that's fascinating. And I think it's just such a good way to think about hopefully we get there with the ecosystem, right? That you're speaking.
Hope is not a strategy.
Hope is not a strategy.
This is why I tried to develop these companies, Jay.
Well, I think you're well on your way. I mean, it seems like there's momentum. There's a lot of focus on innovation, right? I mean, look at all the VC private equity money going this way in MedTech. And, here in Austin where I live, it's becoming a more and more of a focus for the community here of not just technology, but MedTech. And I think it's exciting. It's just it's a great time to be alive. It's a great time to have a mission, right, that you were trying to accomplish as chairman and CEO of these companies, and as advising, some of these up and coming technologies, on strategy, because that's going to fuel the next, wave of innovation. What were we going to say?
I completely agree with you. I think one of the items you asked me to cover today is what advice will give a new future leader, right?
Yes.
I'm very fortunate that I had great mentors in my career, from high-level people at J&J that I'm very fortunate to, once a year just to say, Merry Christmas or Happy New Year, depending what they are, but who they are. But I'm also presenting at different universities, and I tell people the same thing over again. First thing is patience is a virtue. I see too many people. So as I told you, I started as a sales rep and I went up, but that's the culture I come from, right? You pay your dues, you have cycle of success, you grow, you learn, and then you put it into execution. I see too many people that they're 24, 25, they want to be VPs, presidents, start their own companies, and that's okay. But there's sometimes a place to pay your dues and really be patient in the growth. That's number one. But what I also tell already people that are entrepreneurs, and that's to me the biggest failure of every company, many entrepreneurs building a company for an exit, for an M&A. And I always tell them, build a company to build a company. If along the way, you're going to have a great opportunity for an exit or an M&A, wonderful. But if it doesn't come in the time frame that you set for yourself, you know how you move forward, right? That's when VCs talk to me sometimes and other investors and tell me in 3 years, we're going to sell the company. I said, here's my plan.
Right.
Okay. From my perspective, the company is not for sale. Can somebody still buy us? Yes, but we're not for sale. Those are two different things. And we keep building the company. We keep know what's our vision, mission, strategy, where we want to be. And we've been lucky enough that in all of our companies, except one, unfortunately, because we build this way, we're able to have multiple transactions, from an M&A to partnership to going public. And all of these companies, except one, are growing tremendously. And that's my suggestion will be. And that's going back to be patient, because when you build a company for an exit in 3 years, you're not patient, right?
That's
3
right.
years, that's it. When you know from advance, I build a company to build a company, and that's what I need. Even though you have some milestones along the way that maybe one milestone will lead for an M&A, you already in your head have that patience is a virtue mentality.
Right.
And you grow, you learn, and it's incredible to see this, because I wasn't born a CEO. I wasn't born a chairman. I failed over and over and over again. But because we build the companies along the way, I was able in each company to have great mentors, great leaders, people that made me better. And I think that's how you build the best team, is when it's not when you make them better. Great teams, in my opinion, is that when they make you better. And that's where I think we did at MEDX. That's why I think we're different. And that's the advice I give. Be patient, build the companies, and enjoy the fruits, whatever they are. And I always tell always entrepreneurs, remember that an M&A transaction is a shareholder transaction. It's not your transaction. You are a shareholder, but it's not yours only. It's a shareholder transaction. So that's been a fun ride. That's been a great ride building the companies. And it is great to sometimes see how the big corporation coming to us and saying, teach us how to build it. I mean, how do you guys do that? And that's great when I have even my company that I came from, reach out to me one day out of the blue and saying, can you teach us how to do X? And that's wonderful.
It is. I think it's interesting too, though, because there's a lot there, right? There's culturally, there's a reason for the innovation. And you mentioned it, right? It's the arguments during those meetings, the heated arguments during those meetings, and the drive to just build something better for the patient, right? And I would say nimbleness to do that, right? Working in a startup now, I mean, I've just been exposed to so many different things and so many new problems and new challenges and so many different hats, and it's good for me. It's I think ultimately, even though it can be challenging at times, it's definitely good for me as I grow my career to go through these things, and because you have to learn how to solve new problems. And I think that it's not that the large companies can't get there, but there's a reason there's acquisitions. There's a reason they're coming to people like yourself for advice. And I think it's born in that, ultimately culture and mindset is my belief.
100%. Coming from J&J, it was always about what's our core capabilities. And many times when you acquire a company, you want to enhance or strengthen your core capabilities. You want to expand them, and then you do the M&A, and then here you have the biggest problem of M&A of corporate America, called integration. M&A, it's the easy part. Then you start to integrate the early stage companies to this. So there's a lot of challenges along the way. But again, the big corporations have great stuff that we should learn. I learned a lot.
Sure, me too.
Into my early stage companies. The early stage companies have great stuff that we can integrate into corporate America. And if we can find a way to make it sustainable, we can finally solve one of the biggest problems that we have in the world, which is healthcare. Healthcare expenses, healthcare standardization, all this stuff. To me, that's exciting. To me, that's the legacy I want to leave behind.
Love it.
I have 2 young girls. Somebody very smart that I respect a lot once told me, it's not what you do in life that matters the most. It's what you leave behind you that matters the most. And I could never understood that until I had my 2 young girls.
Right.
And now I 100%, from my perspective, I'll give you the simplest example. The fact that I see my 10-year-old girl sometimes telling her friend that her dad has a CEO of a robotic company who's a female, it's huge.
That's amazing.
That's empower my girl, right? Like to see that a female can lead a robotic company in a very male dominant. Just a simple example. Can you imagine if we can take it to the place where you, me, other people can now change healthcare for decades to come? To me, that's a legacy. It's more than legacy. Did I sell one more company? Did I take another company for an exit? And between you and I, I'm very critical about this stuff. I've seen too many transactions in MedTech the last 2 years that are purely financials.
Right.
The SPACs. We can talk for an hour about all the SPACs.
Sure.
To me, it's a shame. It's a shame that many companies that are good companies may not be able to move forward because of what happened. Where, in my opinion, the legacy I want to leave, it's not the amount of money my family may have, but the amount of people that we can influence.
That's right. Because that's fulfilling. I mean, it's purpose, it's legacy. I mean, it's all these. I agree with you completely.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that we're not trying to make good living.
No,
we all do. But along the way, if you can use that to influence people's life, what can be better than that? I really ask myself. And again, amazing. I think going back to the Israeli culture, and you know what our grandparents went to.
Yes.
And you're trying to change that, and you're trying to be different, and you try and bring things to the table. It's a very exciting time, with all the challenges that we have in this world in general and in healthcare specifically.
Well, beautifully said. And I can't, honestly, Harel, can't thank you enough for sharing such wisdom. It's so valuable for me, for hopefully any of the audience that listens to this episode, of all of the just great things that you just shared. I can't wait to review this and take better notes and apply it to my game, because I mean, again, this is truly great. So thank you so much for coming on. If people wanted to learn more about you, about any of your companies, where would you point them? So we could just include that to wrap the episode up.
Don't send me a LinkedIn message and then get upset if I don't reply to you. That will be the first thing I want to tell people, because if I had $1 for every time I need to reply for a LinkedIn message, that will be my full-time job. Just people can send me an email. Right. People know where to find me. Sure. I also tell people that if you see value in speaking with me, then you can make the effort to find me, not through LinkedIn. You can make the effort to find my email, and many people have done that. So again, that's one of the things that I love to do the most, is add value if I can to the young generation, so they can reach out to me, Jay, per your request, anywhere they want. I'll tell you my email. My email is my first initial. Well, it's Harel@medxventures.com. So anybody can shoot me an email. Don't get offended if I don't get back to you immediately. The only thing I'm asking for everybody who send my email is one thing only. When you will be in a position that you can give back to the younger generation, because you will be in a position with my experience one day, and you can give back from your experience, that's all I'm asking. Do the same thing. Don't ask for money. Exactly. Let's build a better culture together. And that's fun. When I get a phone call from an entrepreneur saying thank you, and I said, don't try to offend you, I don't remember who you are. And he said, right. Well, 3 years ago, I reached out to you and we spoke for an hour and I'm doing these great things. I'm like, great, I love that, right? So let's feel free. Anybody wants to reach out to me, by all means, if I can be of any assistance.
That's amazing. Well, that's leadership, good on you. And we'll close with that. Well, thank you so much again for joining this episode of the Sultans of Sales. It was great with Harel Gadot, and really, really appreciate your time. Tune in next time.
Jay, thank you for having me. My best to the family.
Hey, thanks. You too. Hang on one second.